As we saw previously, the Campbells were found guilty on a multitude of charges brought on by Lonoke County Prosecutor Lonoke, and now the Campbells are awaiting sentencing, which would happen a week later, and Judge John Cole would throw the book at them, sentencing Jay Campbell to 40 years in prison and his wife Kelly Campbell to 20 years in prison. But prosecuting attorney Lonoke said she was very disappointed that Cole had approved appeal bonds. Judge John Cole set Jay Campbell's bond at $250,000 and Kelly Campbell's at $100,000. If these were average criminals, this would not have happened, McCaslin said. Several loud gasps issued from the packed Cabot courtroom Tuesday after Cole announced that Jay Campbell would be eligible for a bond. And I just want to highlight that this has taken place in the Cabot courtroom, which is the same place where Aaron Spencer finds himself today. And Jay Campbell, trying to tap into his innermost Nostradamus, had this to say as he was being led out of the courthouse. Everything is going to be fine. And 3 days later, we see this. Former Lonoke Police Chief Jay Campbell and his wife Kelly could be freed on appeal bonds as early as Tuesday. They are both broke, but family members are willing to put a lot of stuff on the line. And they need to put up about $35,000, which is about 10% of what their appeal bonds are. So it looks like the Campbells might be getting out of jail on Tuesday. But, looks like they're going to stay in jail, as they failed drug tests. Both Campbells had flunked drug tests administered when they were taken into custody last week. Kelly Campbell had opiates, cocaine, and methamphetamine in her system, while Jay Campbell was found with hydrocodone, a pain reliever that his attorney said was the legal prescription. So the Campbells would be staying in jail while they await their appeal hearings. During the trial, Prosecutor Lonoke found herself on a hit list. A convicted felon testified outside the jury's presence that one of the three defendants asked him to kill both the prosecution witness and Lonoke County prosecuting attorney Lonoke. And no, it wasn't Jay Campbell, it was his buddy and co-defendant, Bobby J. Cox. The man said the co-defendant, Bobby Jr. Cox, also asked him to set fire to McCaslin's home in the Lonoke County Courthouse. Ron Tyler testified that Cox had asked him to kill both McCaslin and a man named Ron Adams, who was a prosecution witness. Cox also asked him to burn down McCaslin's home in the Lonoke County Courthouse to destroy documents relating to the case. Cox's lawyer, John Wesley Hall, asked Tyler how many times he had been solicited to commit murder in his life. Probably 4 or 5, Tyler said. You ever do any of them? He was asked, and Tyler declined to answer. And stepping off the witness stand, the tall, burly Tyler looked at Cox and said to him, "Don't look at me hard, Bobby. That shit ain't gonna work." But it sure worked on Judge Cole. As a couple of days later, Bobby Cox would get the mistrial he wanted. A special circuit judge declared a mistrial Monday in the case against bail bondsman Bobby Jr. Cox. John Cole of Sheridan granted a defense motion asking for the disqualification of Lonoke County prosecuting attorney Lonoke for conflict of interest in the case against Cox. Cole's decision means that McCaslin cannot prosecute any future case against Cox. "I'm glad that there is a good judge up there, reading between the lines," Cox said. Good judge? Judge John Cole? He knows the deal, so of course he's reading between the lines, which I can't believe Bobby Cox actually said. But seeing the big, bald, burly biker hitman Ron Tyler in person probably scared the shit out of Judge Cole, and he doesn't want someone like that showing up at his house. So now with Lonoke not being allowed to continue to pursue any charges against Bobby Cox, a special prosecutor, Prosecutor Larry Schweikle from neighboring Lonoke County, of all places, was brought in for Cox's retrial. And a year later, in April of 2008, Judge John Cole would throw the case out and dismiss all the charges against Bobby Cox. Quietly, too, as Special Prosecutor Larry Schweikle had to find out about it from a reporter. I bet Bobby Cox thought that Judge John Cole is a really good judge now. Going back to the trial of Jay and Kelly Campbell, who are still in jail, now sentenced to 40 years and 20 years respectively, they filed their appeals and are awaiting their date in court, which could take more than a year to take place. Now remember when Jay Stranomus said everything is going to be fine? Well, I don't know if it's because he has friends in high places, or if it was just simply a case of divine intervention or something. But in September of 2008, Lonoke County Prosecutor Lonoke County officially announced Tuesday that she is resigning December 31st. She sent a letter Monday to Governor Mike Beebe announcing her intentions because his office is responsible for filling the vacancy, her job as Lonoke County Prosecutor. She's leaving the country to join her husband Bruce, who is a colonel in the Army National Guard, who's been sent on an overseas assignment. All states have National Guard units that we see governors rely on in times of emergency, like a hurricane or earthquakes. But it's the president who assigns the Army National Guard in overseas assignments. It's actually officially done by the president through the Secretary of Defense. And at that time, in 2008, the president was George W. Bush, and his Secretary of Defense was Robert Gates, who would stay on as Secretary of Defense under President Obama and work alongside Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But two more of the good old boys network, to be sure. Anyways, even though the placement of Army National Guard personnel overseas is a matter of federal authority, I'm sure they speak with the governor of the state as to which people they would advise or choose or whatever. And what this ultimately does is that by posting husband Bruce to an overseas assignment, this effectively takes Prosecutor Lonoke County not only out of the picture, but out of the country altogether, and allows Arkansas Governor Mike Beebe to appoint a replacement prosecutor in her place to finish out her term. And that prosecutor was William Phelan. And they kept Lonoke County quite busy overseas as well, as she held top-secret clearance and served as an Assistant Inspector General for the United States European Command. Currently, Lonoke County is the chairwoman of the Arkansas Post-Prison Transfer Board. Anyways, going back to the Campbells, with Prosecutor Lonoke County now out of the way, the Campbells went through their appeals hearings and got a new trial with appointed prosecutor Will Phelan in place. They were recharged and plea dealed and found guilty and sentenced, and combined with their times already served, Jay Campbell was released from prison on April 5, 2010, and would be out on parole until June 17, 2022. And his wife Kelly Campbell was granted parole on May 27th and will be out and free by early July 2010. And similar in nature to the hushed-up dismissal of Bobby J. Cox's charges. Without fanfare, and apparently without the written notification from the parole board as required by law, former Lonoke Police Chief Jay Campbell, 50, was paroled and released from prison. So from 40 and 20-year sentences, the Campbells ended up only doing around 2 years in jail, and are now out. And Jay Campbell would reunite with his old friend and former Lonoke Mayor, Thomas Privet. I saw Jay Campbell Sunday, said former Lonoke Mayor Thomas Privet. He's his same old self, upbeat, looking forward to his wife getting out. Privet said Campbell had some employment possibilities working for relatives, perhaps an uncle who has a marina.
My uncle owns Crystal Springs. Do you know Tommy Trantham?
And while plenty of people in Arkansas know who Tommy Trantham is, for those of you who don't know who he is, he was an Arkansas football hero who was a 3-time All-Southwest Conference defensive back, who played for the Arkansas Razorbacks from 1965 to 1967.
The ball is snapped. Olympic is fading back to throw a pass. Flintstone intercepts on his own 30-yard line. What speed! What deception! The Flintstone players can't touch him. With 10 seconds to play, Flintstone makes a last desperate touchdown attempt. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 3 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 2 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 2 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 2 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 2 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 2 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the goal line. Will he make it? 1 seconds to go. Flintstone is approaching the go
my uncle, and he owns Crystal Springs. Crystal's worth several $1 million, and I'm the only actual blood relative out there. And I'm just out there when I'm not working for attorneys. In the summer, Tommy's got Parkinson's, but I mean, he's still pretty sharp. He does his books and all that every day, but I'm just kind of the only.
Crystal Springs Marina sits on Lake Washita, which is located just a little over an hour west of Little Rock. It sits on one of the outlets on the southern end of the lake. And the marina has quite the number of docks which can accommodate most sized boats, from small aluminum boats to houseboats. And there's dock after dock after dock, going all the way around the bend. I imagine all these docks combined can hold boats into the hundreds. And most of the rental cabins sit up on the hill overlooking it all. They have a lodge that can hold up to 14 people. And here's another rental cabin on the other side of the trail. And this is the main building, bar, and restaurant, which has breakfast, lunch, and dinner meals, as well as a buffet and nightly live entertainment in the bar area, including karaoke nights. So like Jay Campbell said,
Crystal's worth several $1 million.
And I can believe it. Now, Tommy Trantham didn't go from college football hero straight to $1 million marina owner right away. He had some stops in between.
Yeah, he did. Matter of fact, when my uncle took over Madison Guarantee years ago, he came in and did the bank for him.
Wait, what?
My uncle took over Madison Guarantee years ago.
And for those who don't know, Madison Guarantee were right in the middle of the Whitewater scandal that so famously involved the Clintons. And Tommy Trantham was the CEO of Madison right in the thick of things. And although he wasn't charged with anything, he wasn't exactly an angel either, as he arranged buyouts for Jones and Nelson at a profit to them when Madison was a sinking ship and technically not allowed to do such things, and as usual, it was at the taxpayers' expense. And that would be Dallas Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, who was friends with Tommy Trantham going back to their Arkansas football days, and Sheffield Nelson, who would then go on to be chairman of the Arkansas Republican Party, alongside Asa Hutchinson. And those old enough to remember, and something you can still see in plenty of modern outlets, is that some say the whole Whitewater scandal was just a Republican conspiracy theory, out to get the Clintons, who of course would never engage in such activity. But what's less talked about is that 15 people were convicted in the Whitewater conspiracy theory, and most of them were Clinton connected. Anyways, Tommy Trantham would sell his marina in October of 2020, much to Jay Campbell's disappointment, I'm sure. And on January 12th of this year, 2025, Tommy Trantham would pass away at the age of 79 years old. Now remember Jay Campbell's Nostradamus prediction when they were first convicted, that everything would be fine? So he gets a 40-year prison sentence, prosecuted by Lonoke County, and then with some Army National Guard shuffling, she gets replaced with William Phelan, who then gets Campbell's appealed case handed back down from the state Supreme Court to relitigate, and they negotiate a plea deal that Campbell pleads guilty to, and then gets resentenced to 15 years in prison. And they do credit him with 969 days served already, which is about 2.5 years. And yet somehow he walks out a free man in April of 2010. That's pretty remarkable. And we've seen that Jay Campbell was a lifelong family friend of Dan Lassiter, who himself was given a sweetheart deal and only did 6 months in a halfway house on cocaine charges that would have landed you or I behind bars for at least 10 years. And Jay Campbell's uncle, Tommy Trantham, through Madison Guarantee, was very close to the McDougalls, who in turn were business partners and very close to the Clintons, who were also very close to Dan Lassiter as well. So I have to ask myself, could it be that Jay and Kelly Campbell were let off the hook and out of jail because they had the help of some powerful people in higher positions who orchestrated it all? Is that even a possibility?
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
Thanks for that, Billy boy. Truly. But I wish I had that clip back in 4th grade English class when my teacher would ask, "Is your homework finished?" Out of curiosity, I had a look to see if Jay Campbell was on Facebook. And he was. Is. He's hardly ever there, and there's not very much on his page. Just some family stuff and whatnot. After all, he's not a millennial. And I was surprised that he even had a Facebook page at all. But having a look, after everything they went through, very publicly too, Jay and Kelly Campbell remained married. And as we can see, they are still very happily together. So good for them on that account anyways. I imagine that most marriages wouldn't last very long after going through all of that. We can also see that Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane have kept in touch over the years. It doesn't look like Kirk Lane is very popular on Facebook. And like Jay Campbell, following Kirk Lane's career path is pretty interesting as well. He would stay with the Pulaski Sheriff's Department until 2009, and then he would be appointed Chief of Police in the city of Benton, which is a city of about 35,000 people, about a half-hour drive away from Little Rock, and is the county seat of Saline County. They say it's a suburb of Little Rock, but I disagree with that. I've been down there, and there's too much wilderness in between, in my opinion, to call it a suburb. Benton's its own city. That's why it's called the City of Benton. Anyways, right off the bat, bringing in Kirk Lane to be the police chief caused controversy, as the Benton City Council had a vote to remove Kirk Lane as the police chief before he even really got started. The vote ended up in a 5-5 draw, saving Kirk Lane's new job, as 7 votes were needed to remove him as chief of police. The vote was initiated after an avalanche of calls from the citizens flooded the alderman's phone lines, causing concern. And a large number of the citizens showed up to the vote as well, including Linda Ives, mother of Kevin Ives, who was asked to come and address the council, as the biggest subject concerning Kirk Lane's new appointment as police chief was his possible relation to the murders of Kevin Ives and Don Henry, and all that went along with that. Kirk Lane said he was relieved that the issue has been settled, referring to the vote, and said he was saddened in respect to Linda Ives and others. Plenty of other citizens spoke out against Kirk Lane at the council meeting as well, saying citizens shouldn't have to live in fear, and hiring Lane would be the wrong decision for the city. And another who says, the whole county is afraid of him, in reference to Kirk Lane, and added this question to the mayor, can't you hire someone who's not your best friend? As it was well known at the time that Benton Mayor Rick Holland and Kirk Lane were good friends. So Kirk Lane would narrowly keep his job, and would stay the Benton Chief of Police until 2017. Then enter Asa Hutchinson. Remember, he's the guy that couldn't catch a Barry Seal for 3.5 years, but then we find out he was covering up for it all anyways? And then somehow he goes on to be the head of the DEA? So then later, in 2017, as governor of Arkansas, he hires Kirk Lane to be the new drug director of Arkansas. So, how is the drug scene going down there in Arkansas anyways? In 2022, Kirk Lane would resign as Arkansas Drug Director to become the director of the Arkansas Opioid Recovery Partnership, which oversees the distribution of money from settlements with opioid manufacturers. Then in February of 2024, Kirk Lane would find himself on the losing end of a lawsuit that stemmed from his time as Chief of Police in Benton. A federal jury in Little Rock reached a verdict against the city of Benton and former Benton Police Chief Kirk Lane. 3 officers with the Benton Police Department, as well as a canine, tracked Keagan Schweikle down where he was pointing a gun at his own head. And then they killed him. And of course, there was no body cam footage to determine what happened. The jury also ruled against former Benton Police Department Police Chief Lane on the same claims, which were about not training the officers properly and a lack of investigation after the shooting. and the jury awarded Keagan Schweikle's family $2 million in damages from Kirk Lane. So what happened is that on October 17, 2016, Keagan Schweikle's mother, Piper Partridge, called the police because she said that Keagan was suicidal and had a gun and ran off into the nearby woods, and that she was scared he would end up hurting himself. So Benton police officer Kyle Ellison and 2 others were the first on the scene and found Keagan in the woods, very near his home, and Keagan raised the gun to his head while Officer Ellison was yelling at him to put the gun down. Then, as we can see in the news report, after refusing to drop the gun and then pointing it at police, the Benton Police Department, meaning Officer Kyle Ellison, shot and killed the teen. And one of the main issues would be if Keagan actually pointed the gun at the police or not. So in July of 2017, the family launched a lawsuit against the city of Benton and Kirk Lane for not training the officers and not doing a proper investigation. And the case would be thrown out in March of 2018 by Judge Brian S. Miller. In 2019, the appeals court would make a ruling, and Judge Dwayne Benton, with the ironic last name, would state some facts as known and accepted by the court, saying, Ellison was dispatched to help with the search. Using a police dog, he found Keagan. Keagan raised the gun to his right temple. Ellison commanded Keagan to drop the gun several times. Keagan remained silent. As Keagan began moving the gun away from his head, Ellison fired 3 shots. 2 hit Keagan, killing him. And notice there's no mention of Keagan actually pointing the gun at the police, and that's because there's no actual evidence of it, except what the 2 officers who were with Officer Ellison had stated. They said that they saw Keagan point the gun at Kyle Ellison, at first. Anyways, the judgment was reversed in part, affirmed in part, and remanded. So now we're playing a little bit of back and forth tennis. As we go to August of 2021, and good old Judge Brian S. Miller says, No, I'm not having any of that, and dismisses the case again. So in 2023, we're back at the appeals court, and Judge Dwayne Benton would reiterate again what happened. That Keagan Schweikle moved the gun, not pointed the gun, but moved the gun, which is what he would have to do in order to follow Ellison's orders of put the gun down. And when Schweikle moved the gun, Ellison shot and killed him. Judge Benton would also say, the officer's testimony that Schweikle pointed his gun appears weaker than defendant's claim. 2 officers, whose police reports describe Schweikle pointing the gun, later indicated that they could not see Schweikle the moment before he was shot. Here's the family's lawyer during the trial.
Well, the first interview that was done, there was no nettlesome plaintiff's lawyers present. It was with the officer. The officer waives his Miranda. He's got his lawyer there. And he proceeds to say, he recounts what happens. He says to Keagan, show me your hands, something to that effect. Keagan raises the gun, puts the muzzle next to his head. He then yells, not once, not twice, drop your gun. And his statement, which is, I think, roughly within less than 2 weeks, is, once he began to pull the gun away from the head, I felt that he was going to try to take my life or one of the other officers' lives to force us into a situation to take his. That's the statement. That is the statement that he gives in the presence of his lawyer within 10 days. Now you take that along with the other statements. You've got Davidson, you've got Spear, both of whom say, one of whom says, I was trying to stabilize my feet. And there was an object between us. I had obstructed vision. The other one says, I was behind both of them. I had obstructed vision. I saw the gun. I didn't see whatever else. Mysteriously, the body cam is malfunctioning. They don't have software or some other kind of excuse. But we then also add in, as an added kind of bonus to create and show that there is a disputed issue of material fact, Cyril Wecht, who is a self-described one of the deans of pathologists in this country, 21,000 autopsies, who says Given the wound, it's highly unlikely that the young man was pointing the gun.
So the two police officers initially lied about seeing Keagan pointing the gun at Ellison, and their body cams don't work, and renowned and famous forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht testifies that based on the wounds it would have been near impossible for Keagan Schweikle to have been pointing the gun at the police when he was shot and killed. I don't know, but it sounds to me like Officer Ellison lost his edge a bit, and the police are covering up for him. So Judge Benton would rule, the judgment is reversed and the case remanded. Again. And that brings us to the February 2024 verdict by a federal jury that ordered the city of Benton to pay $30 million and Kirk Lane to pay $2 million to the Schweikle family. So Kirk Lane's probably sweating bullets right about now, right? Well, 2 months later, in April of 2024, a United States federal judge reversed the ruling, thus bailing out Kirk Lane. Again. So who's the judge that reversed the ruling? Well, that would be Judge Brian S. Miller, yet again. So who is this Judge Brian S. Miller that keeps slamming the door shut on the Schweikle family? Well, I knew as soon as I saw his name, because he's the same judge that was involved in Linda Ives' Freedom of Information lawsuit that she launched in 2016. That was yet another attempt by Linda to get the FBI documents dealing with Kevin and Don's murders finally released. After all, by that point, it had been 29 years since their murders. And Judge Brian S. Miller did the same thing, dismissing the FBI from the suit in 2017, and then dismissing Linda Ives' lawsuit altogether in 2019. And technically that makes it 2 times that Judge Brian S. Miller has saved and covered for Kirk Lane. Whatever his involvement, or even lack thereof, his and Jay Campbell's names do appear in the FBI files on Kevin and Don, as I've spoken to one of the FBI agents assigned to their case, who was actually trying to get to the truth, and who wrote the majority of the documents. But thanks to Judge Brian S. Miller, we'll never know just how many times we see their names appear, or in what context. Though what we do see is ominous enough. Anyways, that's who Judge Brian S. Miller is. A week after Judge Brian S. Miller's latest ruling, the Schweikle family began the appeals process yet again. So it's not over just yet for Kirk Lane. And is Benton Deputy Kyle Ellison, whose shooting and killing of Keagan Schweikle got Kirk Lane into this mess? Well, 2 years after the shooting, he would join and graduate the Arkansas State Police Troop School in 2018, being assigned to the Highway Patrol Division of Troop A in Pulaski County. So Kyle Ellison is now a state trooper.
You'll take my life, but I'll take yours too!
And a year later, in 2019, Trooper Kyle Ellison would kill another young man, killing 22-year-old Brian Brooks during a high-speed chase. From the coroner's report on Brian Brooks, we can see that Kyle Ellison was the pursuing officer, chasing Brian Brooks, and they were hitting speeds of over 120 miles an hour. And Trooper Ellison performed a pit maneuver knocking Brian Brooks' car off the road and striking a tree. Trooper Ellison would extricate Brooks from the car, and he was transported to the hospital in critical and unresponsive condition, and would die a couple of hours later, with the coroner listing his manner of death as homicide. Of the very limited articles I could find about this story, we can learn a little bit more from this 2021 Fox affiliate article, which was about high-speed chases and pit maneuvers in Arkansas, and Brian Brooks and Kyle Ellison's story were included. And we can see that the chase began in Sherwood when a police officer saw that a driver was driving with his high beams on, so they decided to pull him over, but Brooks for some reason sped away. Trooper Ellison got the call on his radio and ended up in direct pursuit, and decided to end the pursuit with a pit maneuver. The coroner's report lists the pit maneuver as the cause of Brian's death. Those details were not included in the incident report filed by Ellison. Really? Brian Brooks' mother, LaTanya Brooks, says her son's memory is driving her to keep questioning what happened that night in November of 2019. She points to the fact that this started over police saying Brian was driving with his high beams on, a minor traffic offense. You had his address, so if it was that serious, you could have come to the house and got him, she added. And she's got a point. There were no drugs or weapons or suspicious reports called in or anything like that. Brian Brooks was killed, essentially, because he had his high beams on. But is having high beams on a sufficient enough reason to begin a high-speed chase? Like his mom said, they could have just gone to his house and arrested him for speeding off or something. Instead, we have another dead young man, and another grieving mother and family, courtesy of Kyle Ellison's decisions. And check this out. A year later, Trooper Ellison would get an award for killing Brian Brooks. He was awarded the Trooper's Cross, awarded to troopers who demonstrate courage at a level not justifying the Medal of Valor. And MagnoliaReporter.com says that Trooper Michael Kyle Ellison, assigned to Troop A, was presented the Trooper's Cross for his role in a November 11th, 2019 Pulaski County incident. So they got the date wrong, as it was actually November 21st. But they'd go on to describe the events of what happened that night, finishing saying, as the pit was executed, the suspect, Brian Brooks, lost control of the car, causing it to crash. Trooper Ellison then began to coordinate the extrication of the driver from the crash and set up a clear path for emergency medical personnel to access the area. So MagnoliaReporter.com would have us believe that Trooper Kyle Ellison is a hero. But not only did they get the date wrong, they left out a few details, such as what was the cause of the high-speed chase to begin with. They only tell us that a vehicle was fleeing the area, and calling Brian Brooks the fleeing driver, or the fleeing suspect, or just calling him a suspect to begin with. But what's he suspected of doing? They don't mention that the only thing he did wrong was driving with his high beams on. And something else they don't mention is that Brian Brooks was killed because of this incident. So there's your MagnoliaReporter.com reporting for you. And as I mentioned, I could hardly find any articles about this case at all, like it was swept under the rug, which it probably was. So law enforcement official Kyle Ellison's actions, while under duress, have now killed 2 young men, and even though questionable and just outright wrong reports were filed in both cases, Ellison was not only never held to account for those deaths, but instead is given awards.
So when you're waiting for the next attack!
In 2024, Trooper Ellison was awarded the Medal of Valor. So I wonder how many people he had to kill to get that one. Now just to note, I don't believe that Kyle Ellison meant to kill these 2 kids on purpose, with murderous intent, but I think his decisions made under stressful situations might warrant a change in professions perhaps, not getting awards. But we're talking about the Arkansas justice system here. So, you know. Anyways, going back to Jay Campbell's Facebook page and seeing old friends. In 2015, we see another old friend of Jay Campbell's, Ivy C. Smith. Remember him? He was the head of the FBI in Arkansas that couldn't say whether a murder even occurred or not in Kevin and Don's case, which they covered up. So it figures they kept in touch. And then I thought, who else is on Jay Campbell's friends list? So I went to have a look, and scrolling down his list of friends, or who he's following, lo and behold, who do I see? Lonoke County Sheriff John Staley. The same Lonoke County Sheriff John Staley of our story that charged Aaron Spencer with first-degree murder. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but I was. And I don't know how close of friends they actually are, if at all. But it figures that Jay Campbell would be following Sheriff John Staley. Perhaps there's more of a connection than we know? I don't know, but 4 years after Jay and Kelly Campbell were let out of jail, in 2014, while on parole, Kelly Campbell would get arrested again. She was pulled over for speeding, and Lonoke County Sheriff Deputy Michael Davis, with his canine unit, found morphine pills in her car, and she was taken into custody on a felony charge of possession of a Schedule I substance. And while I don't know for sure, I don't think she was hit very hard with consequences for that arrest. She probably got a fine or something. Maybe this is why Jay Campbell is following Sheriff John Staley on Facebook, perhaps? He was the sheriff when this happened, and Deputy Michael Davis, who busted Kelly Campbell, works under Sheriff Staley. And remember Deputy Michael Davis, as we'll be seeing him again coming up.